Hello everyone, Ben DiBono here. I'm going to talk to you today about question 11 of the Summa on the unity of God. And if you enjoy structure, this one's pretty exciting because it means that we are almost at the end of this subsection of the treatise on the one God, how God exists, but we are at the end of this subsection, the divine essence. That's right, we wrap that up today with question 11 on the unity of God. Now, one of the things you're going to notice is that, and I'm going to talk about the difference between these two, but you'll notice that the unity of God is a similar topic to the simplicity of God. So those two bookend intentionally. I will explain the distinction for what St. Thomas is getting at here in just a second. But you'll also notice throughout this question that unity of God is really the consummation of these other four qualities of the divine essence that have preceded it. So using what we've learned in all these other previous questions, we are able to say things more definitively than about the unity of God than we otherwise would have been able to. So let's go ahead and open that up. All right, definitions. The only definition we have, which isn't one for that St. Thomas actually uses it, but Father Garrigou-Lagrange uses it in his commentary, and I think it's very helpful on distinguishing between the unity of God and what is meant there and what is meant back in question 3 at the simplicity of God. And that's this term unicity, I guess is how you pronounce that, which refers to unity as we would think of it, but not only unity, but uniqueness. And you're going to see, especially as we get into Article 3 and 4, that when we talk about the unity of God, we are really talking about God's uniqueness more than his unity in the sense that would be closer to simplicity. There's overlap there, certainly, but we're talking more about his uniqueness. So St. Thomas is primarily concerned here with combating the idea that the Christian God could be just one of many gods in a pantheon, such as ancient Greece. Now, that may seem like an outmoded idea. Nobody really is pantheistic today, though I suppose Hinduism still is, at least in different forms of it. But it's a relevant question even for more Western mindsets, because one of the, and I've referred to this question, this commentary before, that somebody like Richard Dawkins will bring up, one of his critiques is that I just believe in one less God than everybody else. I don't think that was original to him, but he said that. Which would imply, the implication there as well, you Christians don't believe in Zeus, you don't believe in Thor, you don't believe in, Ra, and so I don't believe in them either. We agree on that. I just have one less God than you. But what this question does is it puts Christian belief in a fundamentally different category that says, no, we don't believe in those gods. But our unbelief in them is different than your unbelief in the Christian God, because we don't believe in those gods because they lack the definition of God. Even if those beings were real, even if there was a Ra, even if there was a Zeus, even if there was a Thor, they would not be God in the way that Christians and Muslims and Jews and any other monotheists would use the word, because monotheists, and obviously this is from a Christian perspective, but quite frankly, I think a lot of what we're talking about here in terms of the divine essence would be compatible with any monotheistic faith, at least with, some adaptation. You'd write it different if you were writing from an Islamic perspective, of course, but these qualities would be compatible with any monotheist. And the reason is that when we use the word God, we are using it in a fundamentally different way than a pantheist would be using it, than somebody who believes in Zeus or Thor or Ra would be using it. And so that's why this claim is still valid today, because we still have to battle the distinction between the Christian faith and pantheistic faiths, albeit from an unbelieving perspective rather than from a believing perspective. All right. 4 articles today, and I will fully admit that I was in the weeds on these first 2, so we'll do the best we can, but I don't claim to have all the answers. Whether one adds anything to being, whether one and many are opposed to each other, or whether God is one and whether God is supremely one. right? So what do we mean when we say one, that God is one? All right, objections. Does one add anything to being? To be in a determinate genus is to add something to being. One is a determinate genus since it is the principle of number. Therefore, it adds to being. In other words, at least in the way our objector is understanding it, when you say that something is one, you're adding quantity to it. And we know God doesn't have quantity. So raw being doesn't have quantity. Therefore, quantity is something added to being. So as soon as you say something is one, you're giving it quantity, which is a genus. All right. And see Aristotle's 10 categories for that. All right. Being is divisible by one and many. Therefore, both are in addition to it. If one is not in addition to being, that would mean the same. They would mean the same thing, and the terms would be synonymous, which they are not. Now, we already saw similar objections when we talked about perfection of God. The objection there was that goodness and being, if they mean the same things, they would be synonymous, but they're not. And we saw they're two different aspects of something. So we've seen objections like that before. Again, something that's familiar to us. All right. Her old pal Dionysius tells us that everything is in some way one. And this would be false if one added to being. Okay. What do we mean by that? So one is the negation of division. That would be the via negativa. It's not adding something to being. When we say that God is one in the way that we mean here, and we'll get into the distinction of between what St. Thomas means by saying God is one, and one is the principle of number in just a second. But when we say God is one, or God is unity, what we're really saying is a negative statement. We're really saying God is indivisible. Okay? So, it's a via negative. And then every being is simple or compound. Compound beings are divisible. Simple beings are indivisible. So since God is wholly simple, going back to question 3, he must be one. And that's where there is some overlap between these two questions. Okay? The one discussed in relation to being is different than the one that is the principle of number. That is going to come up a lot in this question. All that means is that one referring to quantity, like I have, one cell phone here. That's different than one referring to his existence as one. His existence is indivisible. Same word, two different meanings, okay? Things that can be divided by many can also in some way be divided by one. Multitude versus individual parts of a multitude. However, the inverse is not true. A being divisible by one is not necessarily divisible by many. So, objection 2 is proof false. That many would be in addition to something added to being, but one is not necessarily adding something to being. Okay? And then objection 3. One adds an idea to being, but nothing else, in the same way that perfection or goodness adds an idea to being. It's a different aspect, but it's not adding something really. It's just rounding out our understanding of being. And so because it only adds an idea and not something actual, the terms aren't synonymous. Okay, but neither does it add something to being. All right, are one and many opposed to each other? I guess we did okay with that first article. I think this was the one I got confused on. We'll see. If the two were opposed, one would not be predicated of many. We saw above that it is. So we saw here in this reply to objection 2 up there that one and many, one is predicated of many, and if they were opposed, that couldn't be. Many is constituted by one, and nothing is constituted by its opposite, really kind of saying a similar thing, or at least it seems to me, in a different way. One is opposed to one, few is opposed to many, therefore one is not opposed to many. If one is undivided being, it would come after and be defined by multitude. The opposite, however, is true. That one really was a head-scratcher for me. And to be honest, I was understanding the big idea, so in keeping with kind of my mantra with this series, key terms, big ideas, it's not like the most critical point, so I didn't bang my head against the wall too much there. If you understood it, good for you, and explain it to me a little bit more. All right. Argument from authority. Things opposed in idea are opposed to each other. Many and one are opposed in idea. Oh, and then we have just a very basic argument for this one. Yeah, for a couple of these, and we've seen this a little bit lately, it seems like the argument is very brief, and a lot of the meat of the article is actually in the objections and the answer to them. So, one, as it relates to being, it's the privation of many. Therefore, the two are opposed in the same way that good versus evil would be opposed, because evil is the privation of good, right? We saw that earlier. Okay. So, objections answered. The relationship between one and many, or I guess here where I kind of stole St. Thomas's thunder here a bit, it's the same relationship as good and evil. Evil is relative good, the lack of absolute good, and many is relative unity, the lack of absolute unity. In a homogeneous whole, every part has the form of the whole. Every drop of water has the form of water as a whole. In a heterogeneous whole, such as you and me, the parts each lack the form of the whole. Your foot, you cut off your leg, you haven't made two humans, but you can cut the ocean in half and you have water in both, right? Many is a heterogeneous whole. As such, its parts are not one, and it is therefore opposed to one. So if we're talking about a homogeneous whole, that's true. If we're talking about a heterogeneous whole, like you and me, one is opposed to many. Oh, I guess I wrote my name there. I don't know why I did that. I must have erased what I was going to say. All right, you don't need to see my name there by mistake. Anyway, we'll get to that in a second. Apply to 3. When many means excess, it is opposed to few. When it is taken absolutely, it is opposed to one. And let's just... You know what that is I switched computers. Not that you need to know this, but my old computer would require me to type in a password, and I just set my password to my name because it's not like an internet password. It's just on here by myself in my office. So I would wake up my computer, type Ben, and then enter. And so I must have overwritten what I had there. So that kind of sucks. Or maybe I just never wrote anything. Let's see. Okay, let's just read what St. Thomas says, and I'll fill that in before we actually do the video. We've got a nice little number here. All right, so reply to objection 4. One is opposed to many privatively, inasmuch as the idea of many involves division. Hence, division must be prior to unity, not absolutely in itself, but according to our way of apprehension. For we apprehend simple things by compound things, and hence we define a point to be what has no part or the beginning of a line. Multitude also an idea follows on one, because we do not understand divided things to convey the idea of multitude, except by the fact that we attribute unity to every part. Hence, one is placed in the definition of multitude, but multitude is not placed in the definition of one. But division comes to be understood from the very negation of being. So what first comes to the mind is being. Secondly, that this being is not that being, and thus we apprehend division as a consequence. Thirdly, the notion of one. Fourthly, the notion of multitude. My Aquinas for Dummies version, and I'm the dummy here, both because I don't grasp this objection fully, and I didn't write anything down, is one, to define one, we don't need multitude, but to define multitude, we do need one. Therefore, one precedes multitude and not the other way around. All right. That's probably what I'll write down, or something to that effect. Whether God is one, and that's all the more reason why you should go into the video description and pull it up so that you can see the actual version there with whatever I eventually write, rather than my flawed version I'm using here in the video. All right, whether God is one. Scripture refers to there being many gods in 1 Corinthians 8:5. One as the principle of number can't apply to God since he doesn't have quantity. We saw that up above. One is referring to being can't be applied to God since it implies privation, and privation is imperfection. Well, again, that's a similar objection to what we've seen before. So we can kind of anticipate the answer. Deuteronomy 6:4, Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one. Very straightforward verse. There's plenty of places in Scripture and the Church Fathers that would affirm that. It's a pretty basic Christian belief. Monotheistic belief, really. Argument. God's simplicity proves that he is one. There cannot be many of a simple particular thing. There cannot be many men who are Socrates. There can only be one you. Even if you were to clone yourself, that would be a different individual. You are you. However, if Socrates was wholly simple as man, so if he was a fully simple being and was man itself, he was his essence in the way that God was, which would make him a wholly simple being, there couldn't be any other men. So, because God is a wholly simple being, because his existence is his essence, he is one. There can't be any others, because that would be precluded then in that his essence couldn't be his existence if there was more than one. God's perfection from infinity proves that he is one. If there were many gods, they would differ, and by differing would have imperfection through privation. And this is incompatible with divine perfection. They'd be different in different ways. So if there was many gods of the same essence, they couldn't all be perfect. They would have different privations. They would have perfections that they would lack. Otherwise, they wouldn't be different, and they would be one, which is what we have. The order of the world proves God is one. Since many are reducible into one, the ultimate being must, by definition, be one. And that kind of goes back to our 5 causes, or 5 proofs for God's existence. God is the ultimate cause, and so the simple breeds the complex, you might say. So if we're searching for ultimate causes, ultimate being, we reduce into one. And that proves that God must be one. Otherwise, he would be further reducible if he was not. Here and elsewhere, objections answered. Scriptures referring to the erroneous idea of pantheists, but not endorsing those ideas. Metaphorical stuff, we've seen that before. And God being one, referring to being, does not give him actual privation, but that's how we have to comprehend it, because of the limits of our intellect. Again, seen that type of objection before, via negativa stuff. Okay? It's nice where even though he kind of bends our minds with some of this stuff, then we kind of get back into the familiar territory. All right, whether God is supremely one. A thing that is one cannot be more or less one than another thing that is one. One is one. You can't be more one than something else that is one. Therefore, God cannot be supremely one. God is not more than one, or than unity or point, which are actually indivisible. Every being that is essentially one is supremely one. Aristotle tells us that every being is essentially one. Therefore, they are not more or less one than God. But St. Bernard begs to differ. He says that God is supremely one. Sorry, I'm losing my voice here. To be supremely one, something must be supremely being and supremely undivided. God is supremely being. His essence is his existence. Saw that back in question 3. And God is supremely undivided, as shown by his simplicity. That's question 3, article 7. God is wholly simple. And therefore, he fits both those qualifications, and he is supremely one. But what about our objections? Well, things can be more or less one depending on if they are more, less, or not divided at all. So something that is one by being divided is less supremely one than something that is fundamentally indivisible, and God alone is fundamentally indivisible. A point or unity are not supreme since they have being only through a subject. They have no independent being. A point is a point of something. It is a point on this line, or, however you want to think of that. God has being through himself. He's not simply a quality of something. He is something. Every being is one by substance, but God alone is the ultimate cause of unity. That makes his oneness more supremely one than ours. All right, so after this, we have 2 more questions here to get to in our... Let me just scroll up and close this up. So we're done with the divine essence. Hooray! How God exists. We got 2 more questions there. Question 12 and question 13. And then we get into the last subsection of the treatise on the one God, the divine operations. These next 3 questions are all very, very long. So each one's going to take about 2 to 3 videos to finish. Probably 3 videos. I'll have to get into it. But just be prepared. We got some long ones here. That's okay. We'll take them in stride. Better to take our time and make sure we're understanding than rush through stuff. But that is it for the divine essence. So we understand how God exists. What do we mean when we talk about the divine essence? We all understand that perfectly. Well, probably not. Probably not even close, but more than we did before. And we grasp those big ideas. And that, of course, is what's important. All right, so that's it for now. Enjoy reading the Summa, and I will talk to you later. Goodbye.